a lot of the media right now is doing scenario building on a warlike situation, or if a war breaks out, this missile, this range, that range, India's options, use aircraft, use missiles, use the navy, blockade this, etc., etc. And all this wargaming is going on. This is frankly, a lot of it is, I'm sorry to be judgmental, a lot of it is actually commando comic stuff, because those that are deciding or that are figuring out what to do have a tough job in front of them. They know, they are serious people. They know what it means to get into a warlike situation, because as Atal Bihari Vajpayee said once during Operation Parakram, that it's in your hands to start a war. But once you start a war, you don't know. I will tell you also what he said in Hindi. It's a quoted conversation from his time. But you don't know, once you start a war, when it will end and how it will end. Those are not in your hands. You can start a war. That's why you have to be very careful before you start a war. He also said, when you start a war, you must decide on your objectives. So he said, I'm asking people around me, that's his cabinet committee on security and others, if this war takes place with Pakistan, what will history call this war? 1971 was called the War for Liberation of Bangladesh. If we go to war with Pakistan now, that was 2002, after Parliament attack, what will we call this war? Is it a war of the destruction of Pakistan army? Is this a war of destruction of Pakistan? Is this a war of the division of vivisection of Pakistan? You figure out, and one of the choices. It cannot be a war of India's anger with Pakistan. तो उन्होंने कहा, देखिए, युद्ध शुरू करना, कहाँ शुरू किया जाए, कब शुरू किया जाए, कैसे शुरू किया जाए, ये तो आपके हाथ में है. वो कब खत्म होगा, कैसे खत्म होगा और कहाँ खत्म होगा, ये आपके हाथ में नहीं है. और फिर उन्होंने कहा कि हर युद्ध जब होता है, उसका इतिहास लिखा जाता है, तो उस युद्ध का कोई नाम लिखा जाता है. जैसे कि 1971 की लड़ाई हुई, उसको कहा गया बांग्लादेश की आज़ादी की लड़ाई, बांग्लादेश वॉर उसको कहा गया. अब अगर युद्ध होगा 2002 में पाकिस्तान से, तो उसका क्या नाम होगा? उसके लिए हमें पहले फैसला करना पड़ेगा कि युद्ध हम किस लिए करना चाहते हैं. क्या हमें पाकिस्तान के टुकड़े करने हैं इस युद्ध के बाद, या पाकिस्तान को ख़त्म ही करना है, या पाकिस्तानी आर्मी की लड़ने की क्षमता को ख़त्म कर देना है, या ये सिर्फ इसलिए युद्ध करना है क्योंकि हम बहुत क्रोधित हैं, बिकॉज वी आर वेरी एंग्री. सो विल दिस देन बी कॉल्ड इंडियाज वॉर ऑफ एंगर विद पाकिस्तान, भारत की पाकिस्तान से गुस्से की लड़ाई. So I'm using this. I'm not recommending any course of action, nor am I saying that the current government should do what Vajpayee did. Current government will make its own choices and will not listen to any of us. The point is that people who make these decisions think things through. They don't rush into it, because their stakes are much higher than those of keyboard warriors or TV channel warriors. They are the ones who are sending real people into battle and taking a lot of risk of lives to the economy and so on and so forth, because wars leave a deep gash on all combatants. So people who make these calls measure everything. These are not easy decisions. That's why we are not going into any war gaming or any calculations of how many tanks does India have, how many tanks does Pakistan have, how many aircraft of which type, etc., etc. That is the bean counting business. That became outdated almost 30-40 years ago. What we can do, on the other hand, is draw some lessons. See how India and Pakistan have come to warlike situations several times since the Bangladesh war, then Shimla Accord. After that, India and Pakistan had a long period of peace. Say until about 1987. That's a long period of peace, 15 years of peace. Thank God for it. Choose your God, but thank God for it. 15 years of peace was a gift to India and Pakistan. 1987 came the first warlike standoff, and after that, several other standoffs have come. There was the standoff in summer of 1991 when it looked like we were going to go to war. That's the second one. Then 1999, Kargil, very nearly a warlike situation, a limited war but could have expanded at any point. 1999, 2001 December, attack on Parliament. Of Parakram, a very warlike situation. India brought in mobilized forces. Full mobilization was carried out from all over, and deployed them along the borders with Pakistan in an offensive array, as if India was going to attack, invade Pakistan, and teach Pakistan a lesson. Pakistan also carried out a full mobilization. There were 2 or 3 periods during that standoff when it looked like we were moments away from a full-fledged war. That's when people like Donald Rumsfeld, US Secretary of Defense, Tony Blair, then Prime Minister, they were making quick trips to the subcontinent to try and diffuse that crisis. Very warlike situation. After that, that was the fourth standoff since the Shimla Accord. Then the fifth came, let's say, in 2008. Although it was a part standoff. 2008 was the 26/11 attacks, and there was a widespread expectation that India will carry out retaliatory attacks in Pakistan. Although Manmohan Singh government showed no inclination to do so, but the Pakistanis used it to create a warlike hysteria. Why that happened, I will explain to you as we go along. So that I would call as the sixth standoff. After that, we've had two near things and now one full-fledged thing in terms of a warlike situation. The two near things in Modi era. One was after Uri, when 19 Indian soldiers were killed and many more injured in a terrorist raid in the brigade headquarters at Uri. And then Pulwama 2019. So number 7 was Uri. I would call it half a standoff, because no side carried out any mobilization and there was no kinetic engagement between the two sides. Number 8 is then Pulwama. Pulwama is where, for the first time since 1972, since the Shimla Accord, for the first time since the Shimla Accord, or you can say for the first time since the Bangladesh War, a genuine kinetic engagement took place. This is besides the firing that goes on the line of control, and that is the bombing by Indian Air Force at Jabatop in Balakot, in northwest frontier province of what is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, deep inside Pakistan, beyond Pakistan occupied Kashmir. That was the symbolic point made, and then the air skirmish the day after. So that was the first engagement of this kind, and now what we are seeing is like the ninth standoff between us. A mobilization has not taken place, but both countries are prepared and they are primed. Each one is expecting the worst, and there is tension all along our borders. The strike forces on both sides are fully prepared, particularly those who get off the ground first of all, that is the Air Force, and in this case, the Navy as well. So that is the situation right now. Now, what we are going to talk about is how each situation came up and was diffused in the end, because therein lie some lessons for now and the future as well, because many of these situations had looked as fraught as the current one does. Also remember, all these standoffs, all nine of them, only one was initiated by India. That is 1987. That was the first, but the only one initiated by India. All of these had different motivations, and we will go into those also. So first of all, let me start with 1987. What happened in 1987? 1986-87. 1984, Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister. 1985 onwards, he began spending a lot of money. He really upped India's defense budget. That's when Time magazine carried a cover story called Super India with a picture of INS Godavari. That was also the year I wrote a cover story in India Today magazine on India's defense modernization, because just so much was being spent. That was the period when India's defense budget broke through the Lakshman Rekha of 4% of GDP and went to 4.21% of GDP. By the end of 1986, General Sundarji, who was a very modern commander with dash, he was bored with old ideas, old non-mechanized ideas. He was converting a lot of India's infantry into mechanized units. He wanted mobile warfare. He wanted an air assault division. He had those ideas. So he planned this mega exercise called Exercise Brass Tacks. Exercise Brass Tacks then became so big that many international writers called it the biggest exercise of its kind carried out since the Second World War. In fact, they said it was bigger than any NATO exercise, which is a realistic possibility because just the number of soldiers involved were so many. So at one point in exercise brass tacks, about 500,000 of Indian troops were involved, and most of them were piled along the western borders of India, western and southern Rajasthan borders that India shares with Pakistan. A lot of these faced empty spaces in Pakistan, very suitable for mechanized warfare. So once these forces got lined up there, and there were rumors that live ammunition was issued, that General Sundarji, and a lot has been written about this, books have been written about this, and many people believe, particularly Lieutenant General P.N. Hoon, who was then the Western Army commander. He, by the way, later joined the Shiv Sena after retirement. He wrote in his book also that probably Sundarji did not have the clearance of the government, Rajiv Gandhi government, for making this exercise as grand as this and for taking such an aggressive posture. And he probably wanted to provoke the Pakistanis into responding out of fear, which India could have then used as an excuse to carry out a blitzkrieg into Pakistan, which would end up with the destruction of Pakistan's nuclear program. Pakistan supposedly did not have nuclear weapons then, or at least that was the belief on the Indian side. However, as later turned out, it is Rajiv Gandhi who got concerned because he thought that General Sundarji and with him Arun Singh, who was then Minister of State for Defense Research and Development, organization DRDO, that was the title, but effectively he performed as the Minister of Defense under Rajiv Gandhi. Also, he held the portfolio. Rajiv Gandhi got the feeling that Sundarji and Arun Singh had hijacked this policy and they had taken India too close to a real war. It was in that situation that warnings started coming in from Pakistan, and that is when in January of 1987, Abdul Qadir Khan, who was the founder of the Pakistani nuclear program, he gave, quote unquote, gave an interview to Kuldeep Nayyar, Indian journalist late Kuldeep Nayyar, who was traveling to Pakistan. Another common friend of ours, Mushahid Hussain, who was a Pakistani editor, he took Kuldeep Nayyar to meet Abdul Qadir Khan, and Abdul Qadir Khan said to him that tell your government that we have the nuclear bomb. In case you launch war on us, we will use the nuclear bomb. Kuldeep Nayyar filed that story got published. Next day, Abdul Qadir Khan denied it, but you can be quite sure that the story was quite authentic. That's the message the Pakistanis wanted to give to India, and that message was conveyed. With this started slowly the process of backpedaling. An exercise was carried out, although at a scaled down level, with warnings to Pakistan saying that we are carrying out an exercise. Also, when the exercise was finally carried out, foreign diplomats were invited, media was invited to watch it. Even the Pakistani military diplomats were invited to watch it. So things got scaled down and it got diffused. That's how in February 1987, General Zia was invited to come to India, to Jaipur, to watch the cricket match, the India-Pakistan cricket series, and he used that visit also to have a conversation with Rajiv Gandhi and also with Gyani Zail Singh. Now, some other things happened around brass tacks that we can't talk about in detail right now because it will go too far. Within that 12-month period, very briefly, within that 12-month period, General Sundarji, the way he was, carried out two more major exercises that were seen as threatening by our neighbors, not just by Pakistan, but also by China. So the second exercise that he carried, which again seemed threatening to Pakistan, was called Exercise Trident. This, if in the first exercise he had piled up these strike forces along our western and southwestern borders along Pakistani plains, in the second one, he took a whole bunch of assault forces in the northern Kashmir areas. And that exercise was structured. As if it was going to invade Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and take Skardu very quickly. That again is an exercise that spooked the Pakistanis, so tension continued, but it was generally seen in conjunction with exercise brass tacks. It was around that time. it was around that time that the Chinese also decided to join in some bit of the action. So they sent a company of their soldiers to a place called Sumdurong Chu, or what they call as Wangdong. India used to man it with an intelligence bureau detachment every year, which would come back in the winter. When they went back this time, they found there was a Chinese company there and they were building some structures. India didn't like it. So what did General Sundarji do? First of all, he moved a whole brigade. He moved a whole brigade by air, which had not been done by India in that region. He moved a whole brigade by air right to Zimithang, facing this region, because by this time, India had given up the old concept that if the Chinese attack in this area, India cannot defend Tawang. India will pull back from Tawang and set up its defenses at Sela, which is more defendable. By the early 1980s, in Mrs. Gandhi's last couple of years, a decision was taken that India will start its defense from Tawang and will defend Tawang at all costs. And that's how India's defensive line had been extended. That is what Sundarji now put into effect. So he brought in this brigade, and after that, he launched an exercise called Exercise Checkerboard. Checker, Chinese checker. So I presume there was some sense of humor there. And Exercise Checkerboard then involved bringing in 5 divisions of Indian Army to borderlands facing Tibet in Arunachal Pradesh. And once again, there was a lot of tension. In fact, I was that year in Washington, and I would read stories in the American press. And I remember seeing a long story in the New York Times from the Tibetan side, saying that the correspondent was counting all these heavy guns being hauled up on the mountain roads towards the line of actual control, and painting a picture as if a war was likely any moment. So 87 was a period like that, although later it does seem that Rajiv Gandhi was not fully in control of the situation, and we had a very dashing general who was trying to prove a point. As he said to us later, we were members on the same track 2 groups for a very long time and traveled together. He always said his intention was not to fight a war, but his intention was, first of all, to teach his lieutenant generals to command more than 50,000 people in one go, to command large armies and large formations. And second, to give them a real feel of what a big war might be like, what managing resources in a big war might be like. It was also meant to be a deterrent to both neighbors, but particularly the Pakistanis, that India now had the offensive potential to cause them severe damage, and that is what would keep the Pakistanis in discipline. That discipline on the Pakistanis lasted till 1991. Now, that discipline, the effect of 1987 brass tacks, you can see in what the Pakistanis did in response, Pakistani army. Pakistani army chief, Mirza Aslam Beg, see that picture on your screens. Reporter's luck, I found him on a Pakistani Independence Day reception when I happened to be in Islamabad, just because that is when they'd just sworn in a caretaker government and their elected government had been dismissed. So I buttonholed him, had a short conversation with him. General Mirza Aslam Beg, he was concerned that India had now shown this big offensive potential. And what will Pakistan do if India actually carries out such a humongous mechanized and armored assault? So he held an exercise called Zarb-e-Mumin, Strike of the Faithful, which basically was designed as if the invader will come in, Foxland as the Pakistanis call India, and Pakistanis are obviously Greenland, that Indian forces will come in, they will make gains, they will come deep inside, and then the Pakistani forces will envelop them from all sides and annihilate them. That was the exercise he carried out in response. What this tells us is that exercise brass tacks turned Pakistan's mindset into defensive for a few years. Then what changed in 1991? 1991, several things changed. One, the Pakistanis had the sense suddenly that India had a weak government. And India had a weak government. VP Singh's was the weakest government on national security in India's history. India's never had a weak government on national security. VP Singh's government was one. It started out with Rubaiya Saeed's kidnapping in Kashmir and the capitulation by his government while her father was the Home Minister of India. And then humongous troubles in Kashmir broke out. The exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, the killings and exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, the insurgency, terrorism in Punjab also peaked, and he was really not in control. It was in that situation that Pakistani army thought they could take advantage. They had an internal issue. They were not used to seeing an elected government, and that too an elected government run by a woman. So after General Zia's death in the election, Benazir Bhutto had come to power, not with the majority, but she had come to power. She was prime minister. So she had to be shown her place as well. And that is when Pakistan again started making warlike noises. Benazir Bhutto took the cue from them. She went to Muzaffarabad, and there she made her famous or infamous speech, depending on from which side you're looking at the speech. She, looking towards India from Muzaffarabad, she said, Jagmohan ka hum jag jag mo mo han han kar denge. We'll cut Jagmohan to pieces. Jagmohan was then the governor of Kashmir. So she tried to go with her army to say that I am with you. However, the army and Ghulam Isa Khan, the president, they were not impressed. They carried on, first of all, with their standoff with India. India carried out a full mobilization. Forces were piled on the border. I did write a cover story on that at that point for India Today. And then the Pakistanis began sending interesting warnings. So Sahibzada Yaqub Khan, the Pakistani foreign minister, came for talks with his Indian counterpart, that was I.K. Gujral. And this is something that I.K. Gujral has also written in his memoir, and I've also recorded this, then and subsequently several times, that Yaqub Khan actually gave him a nuclear threat, that if there is war this time, we have a nuclear weapon, and we will not use the nuclear weapon as a weapon of last resort. We'll start the war with the nuclear weapon. And at that time, VP Singh was a weak government, and they were shaken. Around the same time, Robert Gates, who was then Deputy NSA, American Deputy NSA, he came on a visit to the subcontinent. He went to Pakistan first, and he came to Delhi, and he brought the same warning. Pakistanis are talking in terms of starting a new war by using a nuclear weapon. So I was meant to convey this to you. This is something that later Seymour Hersh wrote in a long article, and also Bob Windrum, American journalist, he wrote about this in detail in a book called Critical Mass, The Dangerous Race for Super Weapons in a Fragmenting World. So this is a well-documented story. Once again, this was scaled down. However, one person or one power center that did not survive the standoff was Benazir Bhutto. Because in the middle of all this, she made the cardinal mistake of questioning the Pakistani army, or what Pakistani army sees as its main role in Pakistani polity. She went to the Pakistani army, I think it was the staff college or was it the academy, and she said that it is wrong to think that an army can be the guardian or custodian of the ideology of a nation. Because if armies could protect the ideologies of nations, then Soviet Union would not have broken up. Then Soviet ideology would not have broken down. That is something the army did not like, because Pakistani army, as we heard from Asim Munir just the other day, they believe that they are the custodians of Pakistan's ideology. So she lost her job, and after that there was a fair bit of diplomacy, and this was settled. There is also very good writing on that period on both standoffs, more the 87 crisis than on this one, from Paul Kapoor. Paul Kapoor is a scholar, American professor, who's now been named Assistant Secretary of State for South Asian Affairs. He's the one looking after the subcontinent, etc. So I will also suggest a book by him to you. He's written many books, but this one in particular, it's called Dangerous Deterrent, Nuclear Weapons Proliferation and Conflict in South Asia. So he's a specialist on the region. Check this out. After 1991, we get a respite. Because Pakistan gets a couple of democratic governments. Nawaz Sharif has several years in power, and he's somebody who from day one has wanted peace in India. And this is also his way of getting the power balance to shift towards an elected government from the army. That's why we had several years of relative peace, although terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir continued. A big difference was there made on the ground under Narasimha Rao's era by the fight that the Indian security forces and the intelligence agencies waged against Kashmiri terrorism between 1991 and 1995. By that time, that phase when it looked like government of India had no control over Kashmir Valley was over. In fact, that's what sometimes in my writings I describe as the Heather phase of Kashmiri insurgency. That's the phase depicted in Vishal Bhardwaj's film Heather. Then we come to 1999. I told you from 1991 we had a few years of respite. 1991, General Musharraf, he caused Kargil. He was infiltrating in Kargil as Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif were meeting and making peace. So any time India and Pakistan seem to be close to peace, then the powers that be in Pakistan act up and create a crisis. So this was the classical example of that situation. My boss is making peace. Who does he think he is? Because peace with India means Pakistani army loses its preeminent position in the Pakistani polity. While Nawaz Sharif was talking with Atal Bihari Vajpayee, they were signing their declarations. Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to Minar-e-Pakistan in Lahore and said that a stable Pakistan was in India's interest. Of course, after that, the Islamists went there and washed the steps that he had walked on Minar-e-Pakistan. That is when Musharraf was infiltrating in Kargil. So Kargil brought us to the next warlike situation. This is more recent memory, so we know what happened. India decided not to cross the line of control. India decided not to expand the war, so that gift wasn't given to Pakistan. This also limited the Pakistanis of what they could use in Kargil, because they had pretended that they had not crossed the line of control, and they had also pretended for a long time that it wasn't their army, it was just the Mujahideen. So they got caught in their own trap. Finally, also Nawaz Sharif became aware of the gravity of what had happened, and he asserted his own authority. That's when he got the Americans involved on the American Independence Day, 4th of July. He landed up in Washington and got Clinton to give him time, and Clinton then interceded with him and got him to agree on a full withdrawal, and that's how that standoff was settled. That is 1999. Because then Musharraf took over, there was a coup the same year in 1999. Musharraf took over, there was the IC-814 hijack. Then earlier in 2001, there was the suicide bombing of the assembly building in Srinagar, in which more than 30 people were killed. And that is something that obscenely Colin Powell, the US Secretary of Defense then, called, we condemn the attack on an Indian government facility in Srinagar. That picture changed dramatically, because that year 9/11 happened, and the same year, within 2 months of 9/11, 1312, what I might call 1312, the attack on Indian Parliament took place, the failed attack on Indian Parliament, which led to our biggest standoff as yet. That was Op Parakram, when India lined up the forces on the border with Pakistan, almost going into war. That's when the first response came from Musharraf within 3 weeks or so of the mobilization, where he made a speech in which he said, we guarantee that we will never allow any of our soil or any soil controlled by us to be used for terrorism. And he also said, Mr. Advani had given Pakistan a list of people to be handed over, Indian terrorists. He said, humko to pata nahi yahan pe hain ke nahi, we don't know if they are here or not. But if we find them, it's not as if we've given them asylum, we'll hand them over. So that was a spooked general. Also at the same time, Pakistanis were pooping one missile after the other to demonstrate what they saw as their deterrent power. This was then a long, protracted diplomatic action. And by the summer of 2002, the tension levels had come down. Ultimately, it led to the fresh round of talks between Vajpayee and Musharraf, and then a big declaration that the two signed, peace and normalization on the line of control, and also further negotiations. Then we have 5 more years of relative peace. At the same time, troubles going on in Kashmir. At the same time, terror attacks are being carried out elsewhere in India. In fact, terror has expanded to Mumbai, Delhi, Jaipur, etc., etc. 2008, then we come to 2008 and 26/11. That again is a point at which there was a wide public support in India for going to war with Pakistan. And the Pakistani government and the armed forces also built up the hysteria because it suited them. Now we have to think about why they did it. I told you why they did it in 1991. One, because they thought India was weak. Second, they thought they had an elected government who they didn't like very much. And third, they thought they had already got quite a bit of success in Kashmir, and Kashmiris were ready for a revolt, right? 1999, Musharraf, because he thought that Nawaz Sharif was moving too fast into peacemaking with India and he didn't like it, that he started Kargil. Now, 2001, Parliament attack. Once again, Musharraf thought he had already come to Agra. Those talks had failed. And Musharraf, when he came to Agra, he was strutting about as if he was a victor, like he was a victorious general. His body language was like that. So he thought India was under pressure and he could now take advantage of it. And also, Americans had again declared him a stalwart ally because they needed Pakistan's help after 9/11. That's how it started. 2008, before 2008, in 2007, Musharraf lost his job. That is when he fought with his judiciary. He lost his job. There were two attempts on his life, and Pakistani army had become very unpopular, particularly after the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, because a lot of people believed that Pakistani army was behind that assassination. So once again, 26/11 came handy for Pakistan army to buy them time and to get them their credibility back. And then we come to 2015, 16, 19, and now 25. 2016, two tense moments came, and that is just after Narendra Modi had invited Nawaz Sharif to his swearing-in ceremony, and then he had broken journey in Pakistan on his way back from Kabul to wish Nawaz Sharif on a birthday and a wedding in the family, and looked like they were resuming the peace process. That's when the Pakistani ISI first carried out the attack on the Pathankot air base. That attack failed. Suppose that attack had succeeded in damaging aircraft, large number of aircraft, and or killed a large number of Air Force personnel, officers, etc. It could have led to war. It would have led to war. So the attempt was to sabotage the peace process, even if it leads to war. Fortunately, it was controlled in a limited way. Pathankot, 2nd January 2016, 18 September 2016, the same year as Pathankot, the Uri attack took place. That did not lead to a standoff because India played it down. The Prime Minister said that India will move in and do something, and then Government of India announced that they had carried out surgical strikes across the line of control, which is something that the Pakistanis denied. So both sides got a convenient off-ramp on that one. Then came Pulwama. Now, why did the Pakistanis then do Pulwama? I told you that all but one of these 9 crises were orchestrated by the Pakistanis. That is because by that time they had brought down an elected government. First of all, they had brought down a very popular elected Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, by using some legal thing. They got him out within his government and had another Prime Minister appointed who was a lame duck. And then they rigged the election and then rigged the coalition making after the election and installed Imran Khan as their Prime Minister. That had made them unpopular as well. And at the same time, Imran Khan was beginning to show that he was a leader in his own right. So that is when Pulwama took place, again on the eve of an Indian election, sometimes on the Pakistani side, because they look at things differently. The generals in Pakistan look at things very differently. They look at everything like it happens in their own country. So they thought India heading for elections will be weak or distracted, and that's why this was carried out, and that led to a quick response from India, and then that air skirmish. So that was the last one, which brings us to the current situation. This we've discussed over the last 3 episodes of Cut the Clutter. The main reason is that once again, Pakistani army's credibility is very low. It's hit the rock bottom. In fact, at this point, until the massacre in Pahalgam, its credibility was even lower than it had sunk in 2007, because now it's suffering reverses at the hands of its own insurgents. It has rigged not 1 but 2 elections. It's got the most popular leader of Pakistan, which is Imran Khan, in jail. Imran Khan dares to speak against the army, and his large support base also speaks against the army. So what does the army do? The army chief then has leaned back on really conservative Islam and try to reclaim the Pakistani army's stature as the custodian of the ideology of Pakistan. I would see, therefore, what happened in Pahalgam 4 or 5 days after his lecture and follow on Pakistani responses in that light. This is once again a case of the Pakistani army trying to rehabilitate itself. Where it goes, what does it lead to? Does it get diffused in the long run? Or does this time this gets much graver than even post Pulwama? We don't know. Also, those are not scenarios we can paint. We can just tell you what's happened so far. You can draw your own lessons and conclusions.